Well, Olga Lautman is a senior fellow at the Centre for European Policy Analysis and co-host of the Kremlin File podcast. She joins me now. Olga, thanks for coming on. It's hard to look into the future, of course, but what do you think Russia is planning to do at this stage?
I think Russia at every stage, they had a military strategy to launch a further invasion. And I think this is what they're going with. Everything else, the negotiations that they entered into, that was all distractions. And Russia showed it when they came to the table with non-starter demands.
In terms of Putin personally, why do you think he's doing this?
Well, look, the Russian mentality for any leader is to leave behind a legacy. Putin has been in power over 20 years, and he has nothing to show for it. So right now, as he's getting older, the best thing in his head is to try to reinstate some of the Soviet territorial losses, which he sees and has said up to even a few months ago that the Soviet Union collapse was one of the biggest tragedies, in our lifetime. So basically, I think he's doing it for his legacy purposes and, to bring more countries into the influence of Russia's sphere, like he did with Belarus, and at the same time to grab land.
We know how scared people in Ukraine are. We heard Zelensky there in Paul's reports trying to calm those nerves. What's the reaction in Russia and people in Russia to the situation at the moment?
It's very hard to get a good assessment of people on the ground because right now people have been silenced over the past year that you can't even like a post without being, arrested and harassed by FSB. So, but as far as with the propaganda machine, I mean, they're all out, that NATO and US and Europe and everyone's about to launch an attack on them. And this has been building for the past few months, along with them laying the ground for false flag operations because they, started in December that US mercenaries had come into Donbass with chemical weapons. Then they continued just this week. That Polish mercenaries have now entered Donbass, and are participating to cause an attack.
Russia and President Putin often point to the expansion of NATO as part of the reason that they're doing this. And it is hard to deny, isn't it, that NATO over the years hasn't expanded eastwards. Do you think that is a fair point, the security fears that Russia have?
Absolutely not. Putin has no security fears. NATO is not an aggressive organization. They have never stepped foot into Russia. They pose no threat to Russia. The only one who has, shown that they're possible of invading is Russia, who has invaded Moldova, Georgia, Ukraine. So absolutely not. They're using the old Soviet rhetoric of, creating an external enemy in order to try to frighten the population and domestically.
Do you see this as part of a sort of grand plan on President Putin's part, or do you think he's more testing the West to see what the reaction is?
I do think he has his grand plan of, in his lifetime to reinstate as much Soviet territory that was lost as he can. At the same time, the negotiations, I do think, were a test. Putin didn't come into these negotiations, in good faith. He presented demands that he knew weren't even going to be discussed, but he did it more to probe for any weaknesses amongst the alliance and at the same time to distract while they were continuing to move military onto the border.
Olga Lautman, thank you very much indeed. That's all we've got time for. Olga Lautman, really interesting that live from New York.
Thank you.